Those of us born in the late 90s and the early 2000s remember the height of Tumblr and really engaging in our first fandoms. And in this day of age, technology is at the fingertips of children as young as 3 or 4. So, how does this all matter in a sociological landscape, especially post COVID, where the internet connected us through a time of isolation? With the rise of the internet, economic collapse, and then a global pandemic, we really have lost a lot of physical spaces to hang out, especially if you don't have a lot of money or you just kind of want something casual. And in the past few years, you might have heard the term third space. Now, what this means, it's basically a social surrounding that is separate from work or home. This could be a mall, a cafe, a park, etc. And especially with the height of the COVID pandemic, a lot of these spaces have been closing and going out of business. So, how does this affect us? And how does it connect to fandom? Libraries are losing funding. Green spaces are being replaced by apartment and commercial buildings. I mean, this is such a hot topic that NIH even published a paper talking about how these things affect our physical and mental health and just our overall well being. When malls close, our local businesses are put out of business by chains. I mean, these things really affect a local economy, but more so, they affect a sense of community. You could walk down the street and feel completely disconnected from the people around you, even if you all live within a mile of each other. And this was only heightened during COVID. And what do you think about when you think about 2020? The rise of TikTok, people getting into anime for either the first time or revisiting their childhood interest in it, cosplay becoming more mainstream. These nerdier interests were really becoming more of an acceptable thing to get into during COVID. People were embracing that cringier side of them. And so this was all really important. That online community really got a lot of people through COVID. And so I really want to explore the history of fandom and kind of approach this from a sociological perspective because fandom as a third space is really a recent development that there's not a lot of research on. Let me backtrack a little bit. The idea of fandom as a digital third space is a new idea of maybe the last decade or so, but fandom has really been a unifying force since the early 1900s and maybe even before that. What I want to focus on for the sake of this conversation and the real origin of modern fandom as a third space is Star Trek. Star Trek is given credit as kind of the first ideation of what we think of modern day fandom. People were writing fan fiction, they were writing letters to the studio. They even saved the series from cancellation. So this movement was really organized by women. The first Star Trek convention was in 1972, and it was organized by majorly female fans. And this was really new for science fiction. I could go on a whole tangent about Star Trek if you can't tell by my username. But to get back to the point, this was a physical third space for women who did not traditionally have a voice in real life society. This gave them a place to be creative, to collaborate, to have their ideas heard by people that viewed them as an equal. And these opportunities just were not given to them in the 1970s. And so, this physical idea of a space that they could be themselves was extremely important. And the internet didn't exist. So, the only way to meet up with other fans was through lettering campaigns or zines or things like Star Trek Lives, which was a campaign to save the series from cancellation. So when conventions started popping up, the first convention got double the people they were expecting, and this just continued to grow. And I think this is really the first iteration of fandom being a third space for people who are kind of on the fringes of society. In the next couple decades, we would see people camping out for Star Wars movies, amassing a cult following for horror films, creating community through anime conventions that were on the rise in the 90s. I mean, these things really took on a life of their own, even pre the internet. With the internet, we saw chat rooms, email, fan sites, ways for people to actually organize themselves and also connect with fans they probably never would have even met, whether that was across the country or across the world. And this all really came to a head in 2007 when Tumblr was created. Chat rooms and fan sites definitely gave people a sense of community, but I mean, Tumblr was just a different animal. At its height in 2011, it was practically its own subculture. I mean, do you remember I Like Your Shoelaces? I had to do a pause for everyone's collective cringe, but essentially it was a way for you to find other Tumblr users in public. You'd walk up to them and be like, I like your shoelaces. Now, I don't know if anyone actually did this in person, but it was definitely something that a lot of people made posts about. And I mean, Super Hulak deserves its own sociological discussion, but we're not getting into that right now. Celebrities like John Green would literally be on Tumblr engaging with his fans, and outside that, actors, musicians, etc., were on Tumblr basically a part of the community. I just can't describe to you what being on Tumblr at its height was like. And again, it gave people a sense of belonging, but it also made people feel like they were in the know of something. Even if you weren't on Tumblr for fandom, you could be on there for memes, for grunge core, or the different aesthetics, etc. And it was kind of a catch-all for people who wanted to feel like they weren't a normie in a way. And that was a really popular word that was kind of the height of using that, or calling people muggles if they weren't a part of fandom and weren't in the know. I know. 2011 was a different time, but it really gave people a sense of connection. And I think it really was one of the first internet spaces that gained that kind of subculture level. After Tumblr kind of fell off, I really didn't think we would ever get a website that gave that same type of feel. And I still don't think we have, but 2020 and TikTok really threw everyone for a loop. This was a lot of people's first time being exposed to cosplay, fanfiction, nerdier interests like anime or comics, etc., in a mainstream way. And a lot of people lament about 2020 anime TikTok, and that's because we were all isolated at home. A lot of people were getting into fandom for the first time, were getting into anime for the first time, and it was kind of this creative space where everyone was glued to their phones. That was the place that you made new friends, you made new connections, you were able to express yourself creatively, you were able to engage in this thing that made you feel like you had a purpose during a time where the world was really falling apart. And I think what TikTok does is it took away the anonymity that was behind a Tumblr blog or these chat rooms or these fan sites, and it really put a face to these people. Now, there are people that engage with fandom on TikTok and never post a video, but a lot of creators and a lot of my mutuals gained popularity during the height of the pandemic. And I really think it gave people that sense of community that they were sorely lacking being isolated at home. I just looked up a stat because I was kind of curious, and in 2021, 25,000 people attended Otakon, which is an anime convention in DC, and in 2023, over 42,000 people attended Otakon. If that doesn't show you the influence of just internet, TikTok, and how anime is quickly growing in popularity, I don't know. What I also hope that Otakon stat will show you is that physical spaces of fandom definitely still exist and they're definitely still popular. But the issue is accessibility. I mean, even myself, I went to 10 cons in 2022 and 13 cons in 2023. I'm insane, but a lot of them are in DC and they're pretty accessible to me by metro. But what about people that need to fly or spend money on a hotel or buy these expensive badges that are raising in price every single year or buy cosplays, etc. I mean, it's just really not accessible to a lot of people. Not only that, a lot of convention spaces are not accessible to people who are in wheelchairs or just in general people with disabilities, and it can be extremely overwhelming going to a convention with 42,000 people, especially when you can't be certain that those people are doing COVID safety precautions. I mean, COVID is still pervasive, and after every convention, you hear about how a bunch of people got COVID. So, for someone with an immunocompromised, excuse me, with someone who is immunocompromised, that's just not possible for them. And I also just want to say that digital fandom is just much more accessible it gives you that sense of you're behind your screen, so you can kind of engage with people in a different way than you might in person. And it's just more ingrained into daily life. You can engage in fandom digitally every single day as much as you would like. And so I don't want to act like physical spaces no longer exist, but I feel like the digital space is the more interesting one to talk about. I want to kind of finish this off by really exploring the pros and cons of fandom as this digital meeting space. I do think you can make amazing connections and kind of really discover yourself. I mean, my roommate is really someone that I met on anime TikTok, and just exploring cosplay and my interests really got me through a really bad breakup at the end of 2020. So I definitely see the benefits. But I think that wrapping yourself up so completely in a fandom or a community like that can be really detrimental to your mental health. I mean, do you see how toxic fandom discourse or ship wars, etc., can get? Or just how combative people can be on the internet if you question one of their favorite shows? It just, it's not healthy. It's not a healthy way of self identity. We can also talk about the how making content out of our interests is really harmful. I'm not saying all the time. I mean, what am I doing right now? But I think when you kind of lose yourself in it, you see so many people complaining about the algorithms and views, etc., when they're not paid content creators. And it's great to have that ambition and it's great to want to do better and create more and reach more people. But so much of it is wrapped up with so much shame and negative self talk. And it's just clearly not healthy. And I think we can kind of negate a lot of these less than positive aspects by engaging with our local communities. If you meet someone at a con that lives near you, meet up with them, talk about your interests, cosplay together, go to cons together. Outside of that, there's so many local anime clubs. Start your own local anime club, or even just meet up with groups of friends and engage in your interests. And yes, I'm talking about anime mostly because that's really what I engage in, but anything, Star Trek, Star Wars, Suits, even, I don't know, anything you're into. But I also think it's important for us to eventually start organizing local cons that are financially accessible to people. And this doesn't mean that we can't go to these big conventions, but I think smaller meeting spaces are going to be so important for keeping those human connections, especially as AI and the internet become more and more pervasive in our daily lives. Kind of wanted to just make like a shorter video about this, but I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see way more actual professional research on this. I already saw some people writing their graduate theses on this topic, so I'm really excited to see more of that. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Comment what your first fandom was, comment your thoughts on this topic, and I hope to see you guys in another video. Bye! And maybe even before that, a different animal. At the height of 20 of it